Okay, so this might not be what everyone thought it was. You might have heard the recent headline that Canada has banned the purchase of homes for all foreigners for the next 2 years, and this comes as many Canadians attribute the influx of foreign money as the reason for inflated Canadian real estate prices over the past few years. But more and more evidence is pointing towards this ban really being a loophole-ridden production designed to score political points for the current government, and this is sort of echoed by some recent statements by the Liberal former finance minister Bill Morneau in a recent interview. Now, in terms of scoring points for the government, there might be the perfect storm that allows the government to take credit for something that's entirely out of their own control. So let's talk about some of the hidden issues within this big move and why of all times they've chosen now to enact this policy, and let me tell you, it's quite convenient, and how the revealing words of this former finance minister shine a negative light on the current government exactly in the way that this same legislation does. So let's get right into the information, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so to keep on getting Canadian updates just like this one. And if you want any of the sources I use to make these videos, you can get all of those in the first link in the description at the end of the week. All right, so taking a look at this, a quick reminder of how this ban on foreign buyers actually applies in Canada. Some key notes: it starts on January 1st, 2023 and goes for 2 years until January 1st, 2025. And a residential property in this ban is considered any dwelling that is under 4 units. So that would be single-family homes, semi-detached condos, all of those types of things. But also duplexes and triplexes are included. But any multi-unit, multi-family residential with over 4 units or 4 or more units, well, that wouldn't apply. Another key one that's not listed on this page is also that it does not apply for recreational properties like cottages, these types of recreational properties, as well as it not applying to cities with populations under $10,000. So there are a number of different details here about this ban. Just as a refresher for you, it starts on January 1st, 2023, or started then, goes for 2 years until 2025, and the type of home that it applies to is single-family homes, duplexes, and triplexes. So single-family homes also includes semi-detached condos, detached properties, all of these types of things. But for fourplexes and more unit multifamily buildings, this ban does not apply. Another thing that's sort of not on this page here is that it does not apply for recreational properties, things like cottages, and it also does not apply for homes in cities that have a population of roughly around 10,000 or under. And a lot of discussion started around this ban and some of its lack of merits, in some people's opinion, on Twitter here with this Twitter thread. I'm going to read it through for you so you can get some context, and then we're going to dive into way more depth. Ron Butler says, "Is this real foreign buyers ban or a political fake? It's actually a fake. Many on a student visa can buy a house with their parents' money sent from overseas. Oh, and it's not an actual ban. It's a fine. We'll get more into that in a second. If a foreign person buys a house and it's caught, it's a $10,000 fine. Sure, the illegal buyer will eventually be forced to sell their home. We'll get into those details soon. But in how long? The wheels of justice run super slowly in Canada. Maybe 2 or 3 years of court postponements fit a money launderer perfectly. There are more loopholes in the legislation than fishnet stockings. By far, the stupidest thing about the ban is 95% of foreign money coming into Canada to buy real estate is passed through family members who are permanent residents. So this is no ban at all. Here is yet another example of our government's approach to fixing real estate in Canada: theater, not real action." So obviously a very negative take in terms of the prospects of the impacts of this new legislation. Then the conversation sort of pointed towards Reddit, where someone who claimed that they were a lawyer went in and said, okay, actually, looking at this legislation, this actually could do a decent job, and there's not as many loopholes as you might think. And he makes a number of good points here about how the legislation is worded properly and how, if everyone follows it to a T, well, it will certainly reduce the amount of foreign buyers purchasing properties in Canada. So this legislation does a good job of putting into words that this kind of activity is no longer allowed in Canada. But what I wonder is the impact of certain lawyers and certain realtors that may not follow the rules and develop a larger client base as a result of helping their clients through this sticky situation. Even if 99% of people in an industry follow the rules to a T, there's always going to be that 1% that, well, just doesn't take it as seriously. And even still, this lawyer points out that even though they think that the legislation is worded properly to have the added impact, they don't really believe that it's actually going to be impactful in Canada. He says that foreign purchasers are not a huge share of real estate purchases. People claim that they actually are, but it doesn't seem to be the case, so the legislation might have little effect. And also they say that if this is not enforced properly, well, then there's kind of no point for the regulation. They point at Airbnb regulations, the government puts in certain rules, but then if there's not adequate resources to actually enforce these rules, well, the new rules have very little impact. And there certainly are some ways that some people can get around these new rules. There's no way to stop someone from giving their child or their family member who is already a permanent resident in Canada a big chunk of money and getting them to purchase a property, because that money would be seen as a gift to that individual with no strings attached, and they could use that money to purchase a property. That is still totally allowed. The idea here, though, is that if there's some sort of under the table agreement between that person who lives in this country and the person who's trying to get their money into this country, well, then that's where we get into some sort of funny business. But of course, that's without a paper trail, so there's really no way of enforcing that kind of ban, you know? And all of this is rather secondary to the main point I'm going to make in this video, that this is a conveniently timed political point-getting exercise by the government, but we'll get into that in just a moment, because taking a closer look at the act here, we can see what the punishment for not following these rules actually is, and that is that there is a $10,000 fine for any non-Canadian or anyone who knowingly assists a non-Canadian and is convicted of violating the act. If a court finds that a non-Canadian has done this, they may order the sale of the house. So essentially, if you break the rules, it's a $10,000 fine. Then at some point, when you go through the entire court proceedings, which could take 2, 3, maybe even 4 years here in Canada, where the law machine moves very slowly, well, then that's 4 years later, but the ban is lifted at that point. So really, how much of a penalty is this if you break the rules over the next 2 years? They can make you sell the property at the end of all of these legal proceedings, but you will still get the amount that you purchased the property for after that property is sold for. The only penalty is that you won't get any whatever appreciation there was between the time you purchased the property and the time they force you to sell it. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the only thing that is a penalty here is a $10,000 slap on the wrist, and with legal fees, maybe we're talking like $30,000 after those legal fees are considered. And given that the ban is only 2 years, the penalty could be outweighed by the positive impact that foreigners have when they move their money into a new country. That diversification of what jurisdiction their fortune is held in, well, that could the benefit of having it in Canada could outweigh that roughly $30,000 penalty. But even if this new rule, this ban, were absolutely airtight and there was no way to get around it, and we got down to 0% foreign buyers over the next 2 years, well, I think a lot of people are curious if this would even have an impact. Take a look at this. This is a chart of the current percentage of foreign home ownership in each individual province, and we see this ranges between 2.7% all the way up to 5.6% in terms of total ownership. So you got to wonder how many properties are actually being purchased each year by foreign owners, if over all of these years the total sort of distribution here is no higher than 6% in any given province. Remember, this chart is the proportion of residential properties where one or more owners was a non-resident in 2020. This isn't tracking the percentage of sales that are from a non-owner in any given year. This is the total housing stock and what percentage of that total housing stock is owned by a non-resident. So with that level of foreign home ownership, is this really going to have an impact on Canada's very large housing market? Well, we can actually look at comparables from other countries that have already done this in previous years. Take a look at this headline, note the date, August 16th, 2018. This is when New Zealand started a similar ban, a ban on foreigners from buying homes because they, like Canada, were dealing with rapidly increasing real estate prices. Then we flip to another article here, look at the date. This is March 1st, 2020, right before the pandemic and New Zealand's run up in housing prices with the introduction of QE and the record low interest rates that they also experimented with, much like Canada and the States. And this headline is, "Foreign buyers are out of the market, but it hasn't solved our problems." The article goes on to say that after poring over the numbers from before and after the ban, economists doubt whether overseas buyers had a material influence on the housing market, saying that the ban has reduced a marginal part of the demand, but has done little to solve the fundamental undersupply that has driven up prices. If you watch this channel, you'll know that I think largely it's an undersupply of housing as well as record low interest rates over the long term that is the real culprit for the record increases in real estate prices over the past number of years in Canada. They say on paper the ban did what it intended to do, greatly reduce the amount of foreign buyers, bringing it from around between 3 to 4% now to between 0 and 1% for the amount of foreign buyers in New Zealand. But for it to be worthwhile as a policy, it had to make a material impact on removing a source of pressure and restricting demand growth. If you look at the market before and after the ban in New Zealand, I doubt you'd find many people saying the market is better than before. House prices are still going up and rents are higher. The conversation hasn't really changed. So when the evidence is starting to point towards this not actually being an effective solution to try to tamper real estate prices in Canada, why has the government conveniently chosen now as the time for them to implement this foreign buyers ban rather than 2, 3, or 4 years ago? Well, it becomes a lot clearer when you take a closer look at what the prospects for the real estate market, even without this ban, are over the next couple of years. If you've been watching the channel, you've probably seen me refer to this chart before. This is the House Price and Affordability Index in Canada. The yellow bars refer to how affordable it is to own a home, what percentage of disposable income needs to be spent to purchase a home, and the blue bar refers to the new housing price index, roughly reflective of what real estate prices are in Canada. And you can see that since the Bank of Canada has raised its interest rates dramatically starting in around March or April of 2021, well, it actually hasn't gotten more affordable to buy a home, and we've seen real estate prices go down dramatically because housing is far less affordable. And it's very likely, given the new hot jobs numbers that came in just last week, that the Bank of Canada could continue to raise interest rates, having even more of a negative impact on real estate prices or a downward pressure on real estate prices. So all that considered, why would the government choose now to implement this foreign buyers plan when the market is looking the way it is? The government has implemented this ban at the very same time that we've seen the most aggressive interest rate hikes in recent memory. Now, this gets back to the tweet that we started this whole video on, where he said, okay, this foreign buyers ban, it's not action, it's theater. It's theater, not action. Even if this ban does absolutely nothing materially to real estate prices, which is likely given the comparable that we looked at in New Zealand, well, the government will still be able to point at a decline in real estate prices at the end of these 2 years and say, look, what we did worked. We made housing more affordable. We are very good at managing our housing policy. Look, we did what you wanted. Houses are less expensive. Now, this is very conveniently timed because as long as the NDP Liberal no election supply and confidence agreement holds out, it's likely that we're not going to see an election until 2025, the very same year that this ban is lifted. The government has an opportunity to say, look how well we did on our housing policy. Now, you might think I'm being rather extreme here with these accusations that I'm grasping at straws saying, look at this government plan, but it actually squares quite well with what recent federal finance minister Bill Morneau, he sort of stepped down just prior to Chrystia Freeland taking on the role, what he said about the Liberal government, the very same Liberal government that he was a part of.
You talk about them wanting to inspire confidence, but you don't just describe it as that in the book, right? You describe, and in that last sentence, winning a popularity contest. In your view, is the Prime Minister too focused on how the public perceives what he and his government do?
The challenge of our modern day government is the 24/7 news cycle is something that people have an incentive to react to. They want to react to that. And when you do that, your ability to focus on the long term, your ability to focus on growth of the economy, your ability to focus on the energy transition, your ability to focus on not just a one-year solution for healthcare, but an enduring solution for a generation, is challenged. Because if you're just dealing with the 24/7 news cycle, you don't make those long-term decisions that are going to be really good for this generation and the next generations. Look, I think we could have done better while I was there. I think that the government can do better now. And I think being an effective manager means focusing on a few things that are critically important and doing them every day. The challenge of the 24/7 news cycle response is that that takes your eye off the ball.
Bill Morneau, the former Liberal finance minister prior to Chrystia Freeland, paints this picture of the Liberals being more concerned about how what they do will be perceived in the media, how their voters will perceive it, rather than actually drafting effective policy that can make positive change in Canada. This is certainly surprising to hear coming from a former Liberal finance minister, but maybe it points to why this housing ban went up around the time that it did, when we are going to likely see house prices decline and the ability to point at the policy saying, look, we did a good job. I don't know, are you getting where I'm going with this? I'm just kind of calling it as I'm seeing it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm missing here. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. Do you think that this foreign buyers ban will actually have a big impact on reducing foreign buyers in Canada and making homes less of an investment and more of a place for families to live? Or do you think that this ban misses the mark? Let me know down below. And if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel to keep on getting these financial focused updates focused specifically on Canadians. And again, if you want the sources for all of these videos that I make, I put out a weekly newsletter at the end of the week, and it gives you all the sources for all the videos throughout the week, so you can check that out and make sure you get that in your inbox by checking out the first link in the description. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.